just setting it to record for people who are missing. Okay, that's done. Will you go, hold on one second, I'm just going to grab my tofu. I'll be right back.
How you guys doing today?
Sleepy, little bit sleepy.
Another busy day at my end. Always lots to do. How about yourselves?
I'm doing all right, just coming off of my semester. I'm officially unofficially done with my classes for this semester. I still have to do one last project, but I'm happy. I have my sandwich and my tea, so it's a great day. But I'm also very sleepy.
I transferred to a new job that's actually back in my vocation. I was out of my vocation for 2 years, and suddenly I'm back in and have a lot of professional development to do. And basically, I've been thrown about a grad school's worth of learning to do at once. So my brain's a little bit full right now.
What's the field?
Taxonomy, organizing data, put the data into buckets so people can find it better.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for old folks like me, especially.
When the left-hand sidebar of any shopping site where you can filter by, well, I want only purple ones and only ones with this size of hard drive, someone like me made the decisions of what you would see there and how they're connected.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
How's everybody doing today? I'm going to try without my headphones, but I usually feel closer to you when I do have my headphones on. Manisha, have you had a chance to introduce yourself to the group?
I have not. Hi, everyone. Manisha.
I warn you, there are probably more than this many, but so I've recorded for the people who missed. So go right ahead.
Yeah. Oh, hello. I'm Manisha. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So this is my first class, and yeah, I'm really excited. I am trying to also get caught up. So I've been trying to do the previous lessons as well. So yeah.
So that means you know people more than they know you.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? Because you might have seen them on the recordings.
Yeah, well, I've only watched. So we talked a week ago. So I've only seen the first one.
Fair enough. Well,
yeah.
Manisha, do you want to tell us a little bit? You don't have to. Are you comfortable sharing a little bit of your story? I mean, you have quite a bit of Jewish heritage,
yeah,
and so I think that might be interesting to people.
Okay, yeah. So my mother's side of the family is Jewish. They're Ashkenazi Jews. My grandfather, his all the way back, were Jews. My grandmother, it's her father's side. And my grandfather, he just passed, but he was a World War II veteran and a Jew, and he has a very interesting story. But he did not talk much of that story because, common for World War II vets to not talk about their experience in the military. But as he was going through his dying process, he was opening up a lot more about the importance of his Jewish heritage. And his only wish when he was passing was that he wanted to be recognized as a Jew. And through that, he was on hospice. And so through his experience on hospice, because his memory was being kind of changed. Right. So he's living in a different period due to his dementia. And he was talking a lot more about his experiences, and he hasn't his whole life. And so I just became very connected with him. And I had been considering converting for about the past 4 years, just due to friends in the area. And I know it's such a beautiful religion, and I was interested. But this really kind of kicked things into gear for me, and just want to, honor that part of me since it's been so important to him. And something I just want to honor. So I am just very excited to start this journey. So thank you.
We're really honored to have you join us. You guys are really, and I know not everyone's here today, but you guys are really like an all-star team of amazing people with amazing brilliance and backgrounds. And like, I'm honored to be a shepherd for you guys, because you don't need a lot of help from me, which like goats don't. I didn't just call you goats, but I mean that what I was saying is you don't need a lot of guidance. And I'm happy to pull the strays forward. So Manisha, it's such an honor to have you here, and I think that people will be excited by what we're doing today. I try to, I weave around, and one of the things that we're looking at is kind of I'm thinking like a late June going to mikvah for people who are ready, and then another mikvah maybe in the fall for people who joined later, so maybe like around Hanukkah or something like that, or an important time. And which is so, and I weave in and out of things that are very practical and things that are more transcendent. And so that last couple of weeks we were looking at life cycle, and I just think it's incredibly important. I mean, I guess it's not something I used to emphasize as much in teaching Intro to Judaism, and now I do it a lot more. And it's not because I do more life cycle events. I mean, I've been doing them since the beginning. So I just think that it really shows what a religion's theology is, what their ethics are, what their worldview is, what their sensibility is, the way they handle life cycle events. And so that's been a beautiful thing to look at, whether it's some of the more challenging aspects of male circumcision, and it's tying to the covenant, and certainly around death, certainly around the process of grief. I mean, and I guess I always try to warm up a little bit myself by looking at what we finished with last week. So, and then I'll go into something new. But my warm up is only that, Harvey is here, and Carol's here, and they go to Minyan a lot, right? So daily prayer. It's really short. For some of the year, it's 10 minutes long. For other parts of the year, it's 20. It doesn't take a lot of effort, especially by Zoom. And one of the things that we have is this rule that you can't say the memorial prayer for a loved one unless you have a minyan of 10 adults. And so obviously I don't need to tell you, you can do the logic in your head of how powerful that is, that you don't grieve alone, you grieve with the community, and the community, a community shows whether it has viability by whether it can create a community for people who need to say the memorial prayer. Otherwise, it's really a question about whether you are viable. Maybe you should be joining with other Jews and overcoming your divisions, so that it's kind of not a litmus test in a bad way, but kind of a litmus test in a good way. It's kind of a guiding principle for how you make community and what you need to do. Maybe if you have so many Jews, you can have 100 different minyanim going on, then maybe you should do that. Maybe it's a beautiful thing to have diversity. So, but it's kind of a balancing principle. But one of the things that goes on is that I realize now more than ever that if you're not, you guys are all super motivated and great. Like, I'm counting on you. You're the future of our community. You're the present of our community, frankly. I mean, I don't know what I would do without Robin having read everything I was going to already say at the Jewish law session. I don't know what I would do without seeing Max at services constantly. I don't know what I would do without Robert basically carrying a load for me on high holy days. When I turn to him and I say, will you preach on Rosh Hashanah? And that may not be the last time you preach on Rosh Hashanah, Robert, because I like when it comes to the times where I feel I'm carrying a lot with God, then I often I will turn to Robert to help me carry that burden, because he's someone who walks with God in every moment of his life, and I aspire to that. And so I was thinking in terms of the grieving process that if just everybody came to daily minyan for the 11 months or 12 months that you say Kaddish for a parent who dies. That means that even if you're not as active as you all are in terms of coming even when you don't need to, right? To services, to getting involved in prayer, to learning. Let's say you're just not someone who's part of the tribe and is that motivated. If all you do is for 2 years of your life, you come every day, it would transform the Jewish community. It would create a community like it would be transformational in history. I mean, because I do think the Jewish people play a crucial role in the history of our species. And so think of those people, they're not interested in hearing electron Kabbalah today. They're not, they're busy with their lives. And for 2 years, they come every day. They come to every Shabbat service. They're like, oh, that's really interesting the way the rabbi read that part of the Torah. I didn't even know that was there. And I never saw it as relevant. And so here I am, like learning as an adult. I went to Hebrew school maybe as a kid, but I thought Cain and Abel was about sibling rivalry. But you know what? I get along with my brother really well. So I figured that's for someone else. But now I learn it's not really about sibling rivalry. It's about all these other things that actually speak to me. So if all you did was that, it would transform Judaism. It would transform Jewish communities. And they would and then as well as the psychological aspects of the fact that you would be spending time with other people who are grieving, and that and so that every night that you show up for Minyan, there's someone else there who knows what it's like to have to go back to school or back to work. And after 2 months, everyone thinks you're recovered, right? So they're like, oh, I remember you went to the funeral and you took off that week, but you're back, and we were all real delicate with you at the beginning. But now, it's been 2 months. I'm going to slap you on the back at the water cooler and say something superficial. And so that at least, for half an hour a day or 20 minutes a day, you get to see other people who are traveling the same path of life with you, and others who aren't, who are just coming to Minyan because they're coming to Minyan. And so anyway, I mean, just something, so how we handle life cycle events really shows so many pieces that intersect: the theology piece, the community piece, the ethics piece, and very much the psychological piece. And so it's very hard to reduce it to just one thing. So Shiva is about this, or it's about community, or it's about psychology, or it's about theology, or and then people have, just this past week I had to explain to someone why, as we did last time, the Shiva period isn't 12 months for a sibling or something like, and or a spouse even. Although you can make it so if you want. No one's going to stop you from coming to Minyan, of course. But in just understanding that the rabbis at least see it partially, I don't want to say every interpretation conforms to this one, but that when you lose a parent, you have an opening to embrace God in a way you never did before. Like you have an opening to see, like on some level, parents as wonderful as they can be, and also as not everyone gets the wonderful parents, as challenging as they, in both positive and negative ways, they can keep you in the shade from fully becoming adult, fully embracing the profundity of your existence. They can either be trapping you with their issues that trapped you as well, or they can be so wonderful that you haven't had to face the brevity of your life and the gravity of the significant choices you make, because you could always discuss it with them. And now you really realize that it's between me and the universe. Like I either replace them with God, or I stay small spiritually for the rest of my life. And that can be a choice. So that if you spend 2 years of your life in deep contact with the tradition and God, like that would be an amazing thing, rather than this idea that if you're religious, you go to church every Sunday or services every Saturday. Although that's what I'm shooting for. So meet that, I'm shooting for every week. So there you go. So that kind of wraps up a little bit of life cycle. And I thought I would go ahead with a little theology this week. I tried to do like a lecture on what I'm going to talk about today last year for one person. I met with one person before, and I recorded it. And so that's on the website as the assignment for this week. And well, thank you, Carol, for saying something so nice and sweet. Nicholas, it's good to see you. He's connecting to audio. With that, I will take a bite of tofu. It'll boost my energy and estrogen for the next hour. Am I the only person who like has my tofu with coffee? Like that's pretty much summarizes Nadav. Nice to see you. Oh, you do too. Okay, here we go. Are you ready for? Oh, go ahead, Baron. Go, please.
I was trying to figure out what I understand from what you just said. Based on what.
Good luck.
Okay. The way it came out to me is, at least the way I'm understanding it, is that if we show up or make a presence, that would make a difference. Is that what you're trying to get across?
Well, that it goes both ways. There's one sense in which those who are, like, I'm going to call you guys, and maybe and you can reject the label. In contemporary sociology of religion, if we were at a university and I was teaching a course, I would call you guys, you would be in the category of seekers. And that's a compliment. A seeker is someone who's open to learning. And they're not someone who comes into the church or the mosque or the synagogue with preconceptions. Although, actually, if anything, you come in with negative preconceptions. So a seeker, no, but I mean, like a seeker comes in saying, maybe I don't know what religion's all about. And I'm willing to take a step forward. So that in a way, if you're saying like, so what I want to say is that there's a mixture, Ruben, of people who are coming because they have a real genuine authenticity about wanting to connect with God and with Torah. And then there are other people who may only come because their parents died and they need to say the memorial prayer. And for whatever reason, they know this is part of the tradition and they would feel guilty if they didn't, and so they're not showing up really as a seeker. They're showing up out of, honestly, more or less piety toward their parent, like a sense of obligation towards someone they love. So it's not an openness so much to the tradition as, Rabbi, this is a sign, I'm doing this for my dad, right? I don't know what any of these prayers mean. I'm not interested, like, I'm not religious, I'm not theological, but I'm going to show up because I love my dad. And then so what you have is you have a community that's mixed. You have people who are open to that religion can make a difference in your daily life. And you have people who are not open to that, but are then showing up for 1 year to experience what those people are doing on a regular basis. People like you and me. Like what we're doing on a regular basis is I take it for granted. I open up the Torah, I look at a verse that says, do not favor the rich or the poor when you're in judgment. And I think, oh my God, this is just like what we're doing this week. And I look at the Rashi, I want to see what the rabbis say. I start with Rashi, and Rashi says, well, why would you favor the rich or the poor? You would favor the poor because you think there's so much injustice going on in society that by favoring the poor in this one case, maybe you can tilt the scales back the other way. And we saw that this week. I mean, we see that. I don't want to be too political, but that would be the accusation that our bias is against police officers because we need to shift our bias toward the victims more than the police. But the Torah is saying, don't do that in an individual case. Your obligation is to be impartial in each individual case. Or the other way, Rashi says, why would we favor the rich? Because we feel that those who are privileged have a lot to lose when they are accused of a crime. And I think that's what we mean by kind of white privilege today, which is that, I know I'm off board, but like, so that, just finishing that piece up, like when I went to college, about 30 people I know were busted for running a cocaine ring, right? And only one of them got a teeny little bit of jail time. And there was just a sense of, okay, kids are dealing cocaine to kids at an Ivy League school. it's do we really want to drag their families into this, right? This could ruin their futures. They'll never get to work for Morgan Stanley. There'll be a problem with whether they get to stay at Princeton. But we don't have that concern. We haven't had that concern in the society about pulling people of color aside and frisking them and putting them in jail for a small amount of cocaine. So that in a way, Rosh is right, which is the temptation was, because I watched it play out, which is that, do we really want to ruin these kids' futures? But we don't seem to, but we seem to value those reputations and futures differently. So what I mean is that there are people like you and me who are like opening up Torah constantly and seeing society reflected in it and interacting with it. And for other people, they think that's ridiculous. To read an old book full of archaic ideas from a different time, like, you guys are really wasting your time. Like, that's really a folly. So when you mix these people together, people like us and people who are like, I'm just coming because the memory of my dad, you get this kind of profound relationship of a community coming together. There are seekers and normal people. But then I basically say, if they listen to us for 2 years, that might be transformative in their life. So that in a way, they're hearing the rabbi who's actively involved, they're hearing you, they're meeting you, and they're also meeting people like themselves. So in a way, it functions as a subtle support group for people who are grieving as well. But it's not one or the other. So some people will tell me a daily service is a support group for people who are grieving. Another will tell me a daily service is for people who are trying to put into daily practice religion. And it's both. And so they mix together, and they all parts of it work together in a beautiful way. And it's not too long, because if it was too long, only the seekers would come. And so it's kind of beautifully designed. Does that answer your question, Robert? I don't know.
Okay, good. Correct me where I'm messing up. So me and my kids, we attend services, and we try to be as much as possible with the Shabbat service and also the Friday night. I make sure we show up, except for last week. My daughter showed up, but me and Sebastian couldn't. So one of the motivation behind that is, number one, I enjoy listening to the sermons, because I think it's there's a uniqueness about your style of teaching that is really appealing to me. And the second reason we show up is, when I show up, I try to make a contribution. All right. And I look at it as the way we make a contribution, at least the way my family makes a contribution is, as we look at nature, the Lord's create variety. So by showing up, I don't want to make it a matter of a skin color, but I look at it as, okay, well, something is missing here. If I just show up, I brings a little bit more variety, spice to it. So this is the way we make a contribution. All right. So now I figure, I'm in a unique position. I don't have to say nothing, but just by showing up, this is the way we make our contribution. And then also for the minyan, now we have a service with our kids at 7:30, which is a little bit longer, but I figure this is, if I can get the kids to come, if it's okay, I'll bring them too. That'll be our way of keep on making a contribution. But that's the way so in other words, I come to learn because I like the teaching, and at the same time, I seek to make a contribution too, because I just don't just want to take and make no contribution. And I figured just because we bring a little bit more diversity to the group, this is our way of making a contribution. Now, let me know where I'm messing up.
No, I think you're right on all counts, and that's one of the reasons I like to call on you at certain times to preach, because you have you have perspectives I don't have. You have a life experience I haven't have, and so that I think that you're exactly right. That's something you contribute. And one thing I mentioned, I guess 2 weeks ago in my sermon, so kind of a intense sermon, at least for me anyway. I don't know how people took it. The sermon was about the fact that I'm not happy with the way people talk about church and synagogue in this country, and or mosque. And I'm not very unhappy with the way people talk about going to synagogue in Jewish communities. because there's such, and so one of the things that came up there without doing the sermon, the end point, I basically said, so, you know, one of the reasons we go to synagogue is not to be entertained. It's to, so it's not like, well, do you really like doing that, Manisha? Do you really like doing that, Nicholas? Like, are you sure you like to go? Is it because you think there's a big God who's going to punish you if you don't, or you're going to get into heaven? It's like, they're not coming from the right perspective. Or is it like, oh, it's great, the music's awesome, and you got to hear the gospel music or whatever, and it's like so enjoyable. To me, going to the temple is the same as it was 3,000 years ago, which is that it was a humanizing experience because you gave what you had to give by showing up, and Robert, you have a special thing to give because we have no, we have no skin color diversity. We have very little in the congregation. And so you are contributing that. When I was, and I don't mean to compare or contrast, but I mean, I will say that when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was one of the only people in their 20s and 30s at my synagogue, right? I got a lot of people who wanted me to go on dates, right, with their grandchildren and their nieces, and I know, could you travel to Washington D.C. to go out on a date with my niece? She hasn't met anyone, and that was annoying, frankly. But like, I felt like I felt for me, I basically went every other Saturday, and then every other Saturday, I was single, 20s and 30s, I would stay home and have Shabbat at home. I felt like I gave something just by being someone in that generation. I mean, it's not as, I don't say it's as significant as showing up with the kind of diversity that Robert shows up with, but I'd never, it wasn't like I was, like trotted out, like, oh, there is a future for the Jewish people. We have a single man here. He's 31 years old. He seems to be a decent guy. Like, there's a future for us. But I just went, and then I would teach some Hebrew school on the side. Uh, I became useful in the church, in the synagogue, right? I think that's what going to the temple was 3,000 years ago. You didn't go because they were handing out like shots of liquor. You didn't go because you were going to have a mega preacher go, oh, the world was made for you, and the gospel of wealth, and or something. There was no preaching in it. You went because you brought your offerings, and you basically, as I said in the chat area during that sermon, because people were like, wait, whoa, going to synagogue today is not like going to temple 3,000 years ago. And I differ. Going to temple, the basic function was to share. A lot of it, according to historians, was sharing news. Without internet and phones, you went to a public place, you would see lots of people, and you would share what you knew, and they would share what they knew. Births, deaths, weddings, political news. So like on some level, you were just contributing by sharing your perspectives from where you were coming from. You shared food, money, and other things to support the people that were running things and to support the poor. And it didn't take all day, but it was like, I remember when I lived in Bali for a while, they're on my mind because the submarine that crashed and killed everybody. So I lived in Bali for a few months. You see in their religion, every evening people carry their baskets or flowers to the offering place and they carry them home. It's like going to Minyan with us 25 minutes a night. Right? You go, you catch up with people, you share a little, and you're sharing who you are. So, and if you can share a little bit of diversity, all the more important, right? And I know each of us has different forms of diversity, and so that when you share that, you really make it a community, because you realize like we're different, but we're the most important parts of ourselves are the same. And so I do think that, Robert, what you're saying is something I really believe in, which is, if I heard you right, you're saying one of the reasons we show up is because we feel like we can contribute our presence and sometimes our perspective. And I think that's true for all of us. And when it doesn't happen, then, we're not the community that the temple intended. And so I think that anyway, and anyone's welcome to have reactions to any of this. Like, why do you go to synagogue? But it's not transactional. It's not like you go because you get something out of it, and per se. part of it is to be able to give. I'm not saying you have to go all the time. People don't have to be a saint, but it was meant to be, it was meant to be an experience of making community, and that's not entirely transactional. That's also just humanizing.
Sorry, can I say something real quick?
Please go ahead.
I just want to say that it's great to hear that perspective and kind of hopefully share that more widely, because so I'm a queer person, and a lot of times in religious communities that's kind of like taboo, or like, oh, you shouldn't be here, or your presence is somehow actively not a good thing or not contributing to diversity in a good way. And so I think it's just a good reminder that all experiences that people can share can help bring understanding to another person, right? And just by showing up and being yourself and doing your own thing, you've given somebody else something to think about, something to reflect on, something to share in with you. And I don't know, it's nice to hear that message from a religious community, since it isn't always shared that way, especially in more traditional communities.
I think that's really well said. You all can always help me be a better rabbi about this. Like, I generally lean to the idea of allowing people to contribute their voices and their difference in the way that they want to. You know what I mean? Because part of what happens is that, like, and again, we're all diverse in our own ways. Let's just put it that way, right? That the way we bring our diversity to the texts and to the tradition is incredibly important for the rest of the community to hear, right? And they need to hear it, and it's all in Torah. You know what I mean? Whether it's otherness and whether it's other, and yet there are also things that are, as you're alluding to, that some communities see the Torah or the Bible as limiting, as creating the boundaries, the norms that people of difference are violating. But I guess I'm so spoiled because I've been in synagogues my whole life that I guess didn't do that. Growing up with my dad in Philadelphia in the 1970s, we had gay couples on the bima, and I just took it for granted, and so I guess I've been fortunate to be, and I've always been in conservative communities. I guess I've been fortunate to be in communities I found very inclusive, and so, but I know that's not really. I've been spoiled. There's just a lot of communities whose norms seem to be dismissive of people who are bringing a very authentic and different perspective about Torah. In my little way, so that, like, we need. I don't, like, let's say, Ari, you came to synagogue and I said, would you give a Devar Torah? I would have no expectation about whether you speak from the ways in which you might perceive, like, let's just say from like an LGBTQ perspective or a queer perspective. I would be like, that's awesome. But if you also just wanted to straight up talk about, sibling rivalry and Cain and Abel, I would think that was awesome. Like, I don't want to limit people to being the different perspectives they can bring. They're also allowed to be the same. They're allowed to struggle with the universals as well. So I generally, I'm not saying I find the middle so well. Like, sometimes I'm open to being corrected by anybody. I really am. But I try to be inclusive that way, which is I just want people to speak with their voice. Like when I asked Robert to speak on Rosh Hashanah, yes, I was doing that, partly because I wanted to hear from people of color. And people of color are really different. I mean, like, you know what I mean? They're not all the same. And they come from very different backgrounds and experiences that can be contradictory, by the way. But I would have been totally fine if Robert had just said, I've always loved the image of the shofar. To me, it's crying out about, like, I wasn't hoping that Robert would bring the people of color perspective. Like, I just wanted to be himself, like, so that's what it means. It's like I generally lean to that. That's one of the reasons I don't try to control people. But I would like to. I'm very grateful to be. I mean, I think Beth Israel is wonderful because I think there is diversity within it. And I hope there's more in the future because those diverse and pluralistic kind of takes on Torah are super important. We don't want to just view Torah through one lens. But if anyone ever feels like I'm promoting a mainstream that doesn't feel inclusive enough, I hope you'll tell me because I'm sure I say stupid things all the time, and I might end up doing that. So I think that's so I feel like part of what Temple is about showing up, and I feel terrible for communities that have made people feel not accepted. I think that's I've at least what I've tried to do is I've tried to do my little bit of fighting in the opposite direction. I mean, I know it doesn't sound very courageous now, but one of the things I've done both here and definitely at my last synagogue was like starting from day one, it's okay for non-Jews to be on the bima, touch the Torah, and participate. There are some prayers that non-Jews can't do because to me, it doesn't make sense to stand up and do a prayer whose Hebrew means I'm Jewish, right? Like just the same reason I don't take communion when I go to the church, right? I stay in in the Catholic Church, I'll stay in my pew. I don't want to do something that indicates that I've accepted something I haven't. But outside of that, I mean, you should have like my first experience in my former synagogue, like, it's Simchat Torah, right? The year has just started. It's Simchat Torah. Make sure that non-Jews don't embrace the Torah and dance with it. I'm like, absolutely, non-Jews can take the Torah and dance with it. So, and of course, they're going to be on the bima. So I mean, considering how far we have to go with inclusion, it doesn't seem like a very brave thing to do. But it's those little barriers that you break, and sometimes you just have to break them quickly. You know what I mean? You just have to be like, this is just happening tonight. Like, not like I'm going to go through a 10-year process working through committees. Like, this is just happening. And like my dad did that with gay couples. It's what we in 1973. Like it's just like, oh no, I'm just inviting them up to the bima, right? I mean, if you want to exclude them from the men's club, they're probably okay with that, but that's up to you. But like, it's my bima, I'm going to do what I want. So, and unless they really love bagels and bowling, and then they'll want to be in the men's club. So, and so like it's been a challenge. But the great thing is, I think Judaism has really been more and more inclusive. Anyway, but maybe that's rosy thinking. Any other ways to think about it, or comments, or that you want to share before we switch to a little theology? I mean, I'd love to talk about it more. Actually, it's so deep in so many ways. And one of these days, Robert, I couldn't do it this past year because it was a bar mitzvah. But like I love it. Like I really want you to do the sermon when we get to Jethro, when we get to Yitro, because your perspective on that's so deep. I mean, one of the things that that I've said before. I'm just going to wrap it up with this. I'm not trying to sound clever about it. I'm just trying to share something that's a core belief about what I feel, is because I preach on it too much. To me, whether it's mythical or not, and I don't think it wouldn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's historical or mythical. It's the narrative of our brain. It's the way we wire our Jewish brains. Is that Moses was raised all by women, and they were a diverse set of women. That I mean, the Torah is trying to say. I mean, raised by his wet nurse is his biological mother. Maybe his sister is helping to care for him. You have Pharaoh's daughter. You have her handmaidens who are slaves from multiple African areas and Semitic areas. And he's raised in the palace. It says so until he's a teenager with no contact with the outside world. That's the whole point of chapter 1 of Exodus. And so you already have a situation of someone who is like raised in an alternative family. I mean, if we think of family as a dad and a mom, you're basically talking about someone who has something like 7 or 8 moms, and that's his family. That's all he knows. And the Bible says it's not until he's a teenager that he actually goes out and leaves the palace. And so you have an alternative family with our founder. He marries a person of color, as far as we can tell. You could say we read into that, but that's the way the tradition understands it. and a dark-skinned Yemenite or Arabian woman. And the tradition is even that he marries two of them. That the tradition is that later in life he marries a second. He marries an African woman. And so like you already have issues of skin color and coming in and being those taboos being broken. And so that and all the other things, the fact that we're considered to be a mixed multitude that exits Egypt. And so the Jewish people becomes a mixture of people who are Hebrews and non-Hebrews, and they end up becoming one community. So that, it's, there's just a richness within the tapestry of the Torah already about diversity. And it's and as well as the fact that yesterday, we read sections about we read the prohibition on male sex, male gay sex, but for people like me, I mean, if you if you are going to jettison a tradition because one plank of the boat you have to pull up and throw out, you're not going to be a member of anything. I mean, like if you can't pick up one plank out of a massive arc and then hammer in a different plank into it, if you have to throw out the whole arc, you're not going to. I mean, is there a political group you could ever join? I mean, like, because that part of what religion is if you tell me, what, this arc that you're traveling on called Judaism through history, it's done a lot of damage, right? It's done the Crusades, it's slaughtered millions of people in the name of the glory of God. It's responsible in some ways for condoning and enabling the genocide and mass enslavement and of the peoples of the Americas. Is that really just one plank that you can pull out and replace? I would have to say that that's a bit of a challenge. I mean, you have to say, like, if someone's been a suicide, has been a homicidal maniac for most of their life, it's hard to call that one plank. That's a really harsh thing for me to say, but I'm trying to be honest. But then if you look at the Jewish tradition, regardless of the way you see the issue with the Palestinians today, I mean, even if you're talking about what's largely been a humanistic and pacifist religion of people who have largely been killed, tried to make peace with their neighbors, and brought human rights to the world. And if there's one line in Torah that says male gay sex is wrong, and there are other taboos from that same chapter we throw out. I think if you mix like linen or whatever and flax, or linen and that is flax. If you mix like linen and wool, I'm not going to chuck you out of the temple. So like there are lots of other things. I don't see too many of us growing our payas long, right now. Max, I'm counting on you. Okay, I know you're moving up to her there. I mean, so that like anyone who's going to like have a problem with like all of the Democratic Party, of all of the Republican Party, or all of America, or all of our, it has to gain a certain kind of shape where you say, I don't like the behavior of that tribe.
Can
yeah, all right, please go ahead.
Just an interesting point. I watched a great lecture about that section of Leviticus, and both the prohibition against gay sex and also this example of like the mixing of wool and linen and how they're not, you're not supposed to do that and all of that. And the point that this person made was, well, the reason that you don't mix wool and linen isn't because it's a horrible affront to God. They're two fabrics that are meant to do two completely different things. So if you were to weave a piece of fabric that was half linen and half wool, it literally wouldn't do anything. You couldn't, it would be all twisted up. It'd be difficult to sew with. It wouldn't wash well. It wouldn't dry well, all these things. And so it was kind of more of a cultural thing of like, yeah, you could do it, but like, kind of what's the point?
It's really, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And just sort of using that as like, this prohibition against, you're not going to lie with a woman or with a man like you do with a woman. All of this is like, not really that it's a horrible affront to God, but just kind of like, yeah, it's not something we really do. It like, we don't really see the purpose in it or whatever. And how that culturally has changed. Like it's speaking to a cultural precept as opposed to like something that is morally wrong, which I thought was an interesting point.
Well, like one way to phrase that in biblical studies is that the word for it is a toeva, which is almost always translated abomination. I don't know about you. That sounds pretty bad. I mean, I'm thinking of really, really scary snowmen, yetis. I mean, when I hear the word abomination, I'm like, that can't be good. A better translation of toeva is taboo, right? Because I'm going back to like, Ari, what you're trying to say is like, what if you think about it more culturally? It's a cultural taboo. For example, the word is used, in the Joseph story, right? Joseph has an issue. He may be the chief of staff and of Egypt and running the whole country, but because he's a Hebrew, it says the Egyptians can't eat at the same table with him because that's toeva, that's taboo. So Egyptians don't eat at the same table with it's a cultural taboo. And so I'm just trying to give you like some textual support for that. One of the things that's going on with the line in Leviticus about gay male sex is that it is considered by some people the kind of non-seeker, that the fact that we are a tradition of law, they view that as oppressive, right? Because that sounds oppressive, right? It sounds like, oh no, you're saying Judaism is a legal tradition. That means you do the gay male sex and someone's going to throw a stone at you and stone you to death, right? I mean, like legal sounds like they're going to come and bust you and they're going to hurt you, or that kind of thing. Like, it's not spiritual, right? Spiritual would be, can't you guys like think of another way to express your love rather than like, you just violated a law. So it sounds horrible. And I'm sorry if I sound like an apologist for real religion, but it's the opposite. The beauty of a legal system, a case legal system, is the same way that America works, which is it gives you the opportunity for the courts to change the application of the law. And that is the way the tradition has worked for over 2,000 years. So the way the tradition works is, and there are established ways of doing this. This is what studying Jewish law is. And Robin, I know you've been reading a lot of stuff on Jewish law, so you can see it play out on the legal page, which is, if I'm a rabbi, so I have the position, I have the position of Mar D'Atra. I am the judge for this jurisdiction of Beth Israel congregation. So I decide how the law is applied and so on and so forth. There's a fairly straightforward set of what counts as legal maneuvers that you use in order to make decisions about everything. How do you swallow your tofu whole? How do you shorten the service? Right? Can I shorten the service today? Can I skip Adon Olam? I mean, even from the mundane of the prayers to really profound things. So to cut to the chase, if there is something within Jewish law that is problematic in our cultural milieu, the beauty of a legal system is that you can use legal techniques to minimize its application. So one straightforward way of doing it constantly in Jewish law is, this is not new. Like, let's just use some huge examples, right? The Torah says you have to let the land go fallow every 6 years and not farm it. And every 49 years, the land has to be fallow for 2 years. And you have to forgive all loans every 6 years. And it goes on and on. In real societies, they were like, how are you going to have a mortgage? Right? Everyone's going to have a 6-year mortgage. How can you take out a mortgage in the 6th year? Because then you only have like 6 months left. So there were real problems. And so how are you going to do that? And so that they would create legal workarounds. Now, for people who are outside of a legal tradition like Judaism, they're like, that's why I hate those Jews. They're just figuring out ways not to follow God, right? But the truth is that this is the way legal systems work, right? They figure out ways within the process to change the way you live certain things. So with one of the ways you do it is you change the application. You change what cases are prosecutable, or what cases you minimize the scope to which it applies. So for example, we were talking a little bit about the fact that a man can't put on women's clothes and a woman can't put on man's clothes, and it's right there in the Torah. But then even the rabbi said, how about if you're dressing up for a costume party? So this is right in the Talmud, right? It's Purim. How many guys put on women's clothes on Purim? How many, you're telling me a girl can't dress like Mordechai? A guy can't dress like Esther? We do it all the time. One day you'll ask me my story about my big motorcycle accident. Thank God I'm still here. I was coming home from a costume party, and I was my gender was misunderstood by the emergency room based on my wig, my makeup, and my clothing. And so, like, guys dress up in girls' clothing sometimes, and then they have motorcycle accidents. So that what do you like? So the Talmud already asked, what do you do? Well, then we have to limit the scope. We're not talking about all the times guys put on girls' clothes and girls put on guys' clothes. We're talking about only some of the time that happens. And then you can just keep limiting it and limiting it and limiting it. As I pointed out before, casually, you can go right to the rabbinic interpretation of Rashi and others, which is a woman can't put on, I mean, you could limit it and say it's only in the case where a woman is dressing in man's clothes in order to carry on an affair with a married man. In other words, she's trying to sneak in to male residences. You can imagine in more gender-separated societies that would have made more sense, or today in more gender-separated cultures. Going back to Ari's point about culture, in a certain culture, it meant you were sneaking in, and for men, Rashi points out the scope is peeping toms. That like it is men put on women's clothes so they can sneak into the girls' locker room or catch peeks. It's awful stuff, but they're like, so short of that's the limitation of the scope. Similarly, this happens in tons and tons of areas. It could be that, well, we do have to do every prayer on Saturday, but only under the scope of if we have enough time. If we don't have enough time, then we don't have to do it. So that you can limit the context and the scope. And one of the ways that you could do it, it sounds like a reach. You could say you're reading against the fabric of the Torah. Is you could say, and again, I don't mean I'm terrible at this. I just understand that I'm trying my best with to not sound stupid, but it could mean that that same, and again, I'm just going to use biological sex here, like that. It could mean that in the context of the sexual and incest laws, in that section of Leviticus 18, that male sex counts as sex, right? That male on male sex counts as sex, so that you can't, if you're being married, it's not like the male sex doesn't count as male sex. It counts as sex. Or you could try to limit its scope, for example, to adultery. You could try to limit its scope to adultery and incest. And you could say, well, you're kind of reading against it. We do that all the time. Jewish law has a 2,000-year history of lifting up and saying, and that's only in the case of just limiting the scope of when something applies. So that that can be done. And what I would say is that, if you're changing the scope of 60% of what's in the Torah, it probably is not going to look like Judaism anymore. But if you're changing the scope of 5 to 10% of what's in Torah, that's a healthy, vibrant tradition that's going through time. That's the difference between a religion and a cult. A cult has fixed rules where they say no messing around with what number 3, they've got their chart in the cult cafeteria, right? You go to the cult commissary, they got the chart of the 30 rules of the cult. There ain't no room for interpretation, right? If it's kind of like, a man has 4 wives in our cult, and you're like, but I'm really good with just one. Whoa, it says 4. None of this, we're going to limit the scope and say in some cases it can be 1, so that, and cults die out. And so vibrant traditions have to be able to take a plank out of their book and rethink that plank. If they're doing all the planks at the same time, then the ship sinks. And it's not, and then you're not in the same boat anymore. And so I'm reading a little bit in the chat area, and good, it's to everyone. So I'm not right. They also talk about the soldiers in the Talmud. Interesting. Yeah, there's this whole issue. There's an issue about whether a woman can carry a weapon. And interestingly, and you, Robin, you may remember this, and Ari better than I do. it actually goes both ways. On the one hand, they're worried about women wearing men's military uniforms and carrying a weapon. And then someone else says, but you know, if they're walking home late at night, they should be able to carry a weapon. So there's even like, there's even like, yeah, you know, but I have a problem with that one too. So, and at some point where it's not so much. Yeah, so I'm just reading about, appreciate asking you about cultural context there of how the rabbis are working with each other and working with the context of common practice. Not relevant in the current discussion, but very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I can say something very simple without going into the details. And I'm risk again. I'm saying stuff to you guys like I consider you guys kind of my posse. So like I share stuff with you that may not be fully ready for prime time over the microphone. I don't think inclusion is hard. And so I think it's highly problematic when people make it so. So the reason I say that is I had I think about this a lot. There was a study session I attended. I know people don't like when I tell these stories, but and it was with young people, younger than myself. I apologize. Who were more modern Orthodox. And there's a part of me that's envious. They're young, they're smart, they're studying, they're knowledgeable, they know Hebrew. They're actively involved in their Jewish communities. They're cool. They're really, really cool. And I'm learning with them and from them. And one of the things they brought up is how cool it is that in the pandemic, some Orthodox rabbis have been open to women's perspectives on going to the mikveh. Because women, could they go to the mikveh during pandemic if the mikvehs are closed because they're not safe places to be? And they were showing how on social media there were Facebook groups of Orthodox women saying, we want to be able to go to mikveh, or we don't want to be able to go to mikveh, and the Orthodox rabbis were actually looking at some of these Facebook posts to figure out how they were going to make their decisions. And they viewed this as highly progressive. I did not. Right? And I said so. And they were, I think maybe I was rude. So, and no, I'm serious, which is that I don't call that progress. And they were like, but Nadav, you have to understand, this Rabbi, you have to understand, you know, in more religious communities, it can take a really, really long time to make change. And I said, at 54 years old, I no longer believe that. I don't think inclusion is hard. I don't think what my dad did in 1972, 73 was hard. I don't think it was hard for me to say, there's nowhere where it says a non-Jew can't touch a Torah. In fact, it says the opposite. A non-Jew can touch Torah, is incapable of getting cooties and of any sort. So, so I've just found like I wouldn't brag if I were part of a community that said we also do bat mitzvahs for women. We just do them Friday night. They take place in the social hall instead of the sanctuary, and they read a psalm. Like I just wouldn't brag about that, you know. So like I guess what I've learned is that I actually find inclusion should happen like with the scalpel. It should be fast. It should just be like now we're there, you know. And I think we should have been doing gay marriage ages ago. I don't think I should have been doing them illegally as I was in California before they were passed. And so thinking about I think what happened back when the conservative movement finally decriminalized homosexuality, I think you just dealt with a lot of people who are ready, like me, to be like, this is ridiculous, we're having this discussion. And with a lot of people who are like, this is way too soon. Don't you understand? Religious communities take a long time. But you know what? we can take a long time to figure out whether you can use an electric car on Shabbat. We can take a long time to figure out whether red wine without a hechsher is still kosher if it's not made in South America. I mean, but you shouldn't be taking a long time to include people when you recognize their human dignity. I don't think, and I think Torah is trying to tell you that. So I think that that's been kind of the revolution a little bit in conservative self-understanding of halakha, which is that you have the laws and you're doing these legal techniques with it, but you also have to know what you stand for. And this came up yesterday in the Devar Torah for people who heard it, which is that it was just a little piece at the beginning. When it says, these are the laws and thou shalt live by them, the interpretation in the Talmud is, why do you have to say, and thou shalt live by them? Because if you're doing the laws, you're already alive. So like, and you have to be alive. I mean, like, you're right, redundant. What does it mean? And now they interpret, and this is a big interpretation. It means that the Torah is always about saving a human life. You have to be alive to do it. And so you do the laws in such a way that people live, right? And then they say, and this justifies the position of pikuach nefesh, that you can break any Jewish law except for 3 in order to save a life. And it shouldn't be a consolation. Like, darn it, I had to interrupt my prayers to save a life. So they look at this. It's not like, no, don't say it was an inconvenience. Say, this is the point of it. And why? Because when you understand the value of human life, you understand the value of human dignity. And you understand that people are in the image of God. And to save one life is like saving a world. And so like, it's those things that make you have to go fast with inclusion. And, that's where a committee can be your biggest enemy. And so, because committees don't function so well. Anyway, that was too long of a thing, but I think that it was, so there were people like us who are just like, we can rip that plank out. We can just say, look, it only applies to a case that that sex counts as sex. And don't be like, you know what, it doesn't count somehow. Or it's limited to cases of whatever, or we just don't do it anymore. I mean, we don't criminalize that anymore in such a way. There were positions I didn't like, but were along, I mean, they're not positions I like, but there were positions at the time, even by people who were way on the conservative right-wing side, that I didn't like, who also said the same thing I just did for Harvey. I don't know if you were there. I just had a joint meeting of the Religious Affairs Committee and the Cemetery Committee. And I did the cremation piece, which is most Jewish cemeteries don't allow cremated remains. But now we have 20% of people doing cremation. But the big point is this. When we bury Jews, we don't ask them if they broke rules, right? We don't ask them how kosher they were. We don't ask them if they ate bacon, right? We don't ask them if they, the fact that they chose cremation shouldn't disqualify them from being buried in Jewish cemetery, because there's no reason you can't bury cremated remains in Jewish cemetery. Like, there's just no reason except for that. So like, one of the things people said is that we shouldn't, we don't ask people about their personal lives. And so we just shouldn't ask people about their personal lives. I didn't like that because it still meant I couldn't do gay marriages. Just like I can't be like, here's your bacon sandwich, here's your bacon sandwich, now say I do. Like, so I didn't like that position, but at least people were trying to work within the context of making it okay. Anyway, I appreciate you anyway, thanks for allowing us to go off on a tangent, but it is about the way we make the law work. And the law is made work by people like us. I mean, it is a matter of applying the law and figuring it out. On another line, I mean, Ari, when you brought up the issue of the taboo and the culture, you're allowed to do cultural issues. I mean, obviously you're going to go to one community and they're going to say, how can Nadav's wife not be wearing a wig, right? And I'm going to be like, well, that was considered really, really, really modest to wear a wig back in the Middle Ages. But now, frankly, I think the wigs are pretty hot. Like, I think it's actually the opposite. I think the wigs are more like, wow, like, look at her, rather than, oh, wow, let's not look at her. So, culturally, it's completely flipped, which is now wigs are a sign of, garnering attention and wanting to be considered attractive. So cultural thing, and you're allowed to understand laws and in their context and change them. You don't, especially, in fact, if you had to say what's what's the most visible difference between fundamentalist religion and non-fundamentalist religion? It is over modesty laws. It is about preserving modesty laws from other times and saying that culturally is relevant now. When you're like, is it really? Like, you know, and because those things do culturally change. The other issue around the linen and the wool is the context. There is a taboo in sections of the Torah like that one about cross-species stuff, and particularly, and like there is a way in which like don't breed the mule. I don't even know what a mule is. Don't breed the horse with the whatever. Like there's a taboo which we can understand, like this ancient taboo of like stop breeding stuff together that shouldn't be bred together, and some of that stuff may not be a taboo that we want to preserve. But I will tell you this: I have a former colleague who's heavy into the whole GMO thing, and Jewish rabbis like him are really into analyzing GMO stuff because they're like, he's like, let's not be so quick to kick aside this idea of not mixing species because it's very relevant today in understanding whether we can mix genetic material from two different species to make a super species. Thank you. A mule is the offspring of a male donkey. Right. So like they don't like mixing a donkey and a horse in the Torah. And so like there's a taboo against that. And I'm just saying, maybe I feel that about GMOs. Maybe I'm a little bit, maybe I'm open to my friend Rabbi Goldstein writing articles about this. Because I'm like, don't I want a better tomato that doesn't like, couldn't we feed the world with tomatoes that last longer? And then, but I do want to know from someone who says, be careful, of the monster freak tomato that you have just created that then, like ruins our ecosystem. So even I'm like, I don't even know what to do about this GMO stuff. And, but it is coming from the same root of a concern about what we know we're doing when we're mixing genetic material. I think anyway, unless you think I'm just reading back into something that had a totally different sensibility. So I told you I'd do some Kabbalah. Here we go. You guys ready? It's going to be big. It's going to be powerful. It's going to blow your mind unless you've already read it before, and then it's not going to blow your mind at all. So here it goes. There are two basic views in Judaism. You don't have to have any particular beliefs in God to convert, except that God is one. So as long as you say God is one, it could be God is oneness, God is interconnectedness, God is one thing over there. It's up to you what that means, and you don't have to have a particular interpretation of it. So as long as you can say our God is one God, you're kosher. The classic example is you can be a Jewish socialist as part of the Bund in the 1920s in America. You could be part of the Jewish socialist labor movement, in which case the oneness of God. They didn't feel the need to be humanistic. Well, some of them did. They didn't need to feel like the need to take the word God out of everything. Their attitude is God is exactly as Karl Marx said it. It is the oneness of workers who are able to actually experience the fruits of their labors joined in camaraderie, of each feeling the camaraderie of the other. It is the oneness of the expression of human labor and the human worker without being ripped off by the capitalist. And so they're like, absolutely, that's the oneness we're going for. You could be going to a Grateful Dead concert. Well, I guess you can't because they're dead. Well, some of them are anyway. But like back when we used to go to Grateful Dead concerts, you could be like, this is what we're talking about. Like this is this oneness that I'm experiencing, which is a kind of effervescence that sort of Emil Durkheim used to talk about in the Foundations of the Forms of the Religious Life, which is a very strange experience of a communal consciousness happening at one time that seems to be shared, and is also the roots of what it means to have a festival, and our holidays are rooted in this concept of a whether it's possible to create a group consciousness. It could mean I talk to God because God's up there listening to me. So you can, whatever it means, it can mean. So in general, there are two ways that this has gone in Judaism. One is, let's keep it simple. God is a super being that may be unimaginable and may have been alive before the beginning of time and will continue after the beginning of time. But there's something fundamentally similar between me. I can have a conversation with God. Like I'm allowed to anthropomorphize. I'm allowed to anthropomorphize God. I think I missed a syllable. I'm allowed to do that. I'm allowed to think of God as a person, and whatever God is, it may not be a person, but it's enough like it that when it says God spoke to Moses, God can somehow speak, whatever we mean that to be. Maybe it's in his brain, maybe it was in Moses's ear. When I read about the burning bush, it means that there's like a real voice came out. When I think of angels, I think of actual kinds of things that someone saw and they're like, whoa, there's the angel Gabriel, and great haircut, and so like we're allowed to think in those ways. The other way is to actually go in a totally different direction. For most of when I did Jewish philosophy in my academic work, there was a revolution that's happened in my lifetime, and it was really weird. Most of the kind of Jewish philosophy and history that had been done starting with the Enlightenment in the 1700s was based around the idea that Judaism had always been very rational and very personalizing of God. And that mysticism, the idea that God is everywhere and that God cannot be thought of as a person, was a very, very minor stream and negligible in its impact. And what became obvious during my time in the academy, particularly in the late 1900s, was that during the Enlightenment, when Jews were trying to this is the beginning. It was really in the 1830s that Jews were first allowed to go to any universities that were public. America is kind of a separate issue, but very minor. And Jews had always been excluded from universities and public schools. In Western Europe, Jews were anxious to be able to become doctors and lawyers and professors and go to university. And those people who became the philosophers and historians felt that mysticism and superstition were the same thing, so that they hid the impact of Jewish mysticism in our history strongly. And that's been proven, even when they knew it was there, because they felt it would be embarrassing to be in a department of theology in Heidelberg in 1890 and to tell people that people used to put mezuzahs on their doorposts to scare away the evil spirits. They eliminated that from their accounts of Jewish history and Jewish tradition. It was not a part of the tradition according to them. They did that consciously and purposely to make us seem less superstitious. So what happened in the late 1900s is several scholars, starting with Gershom Scholem, the Moshe Idel, and then others just multiplying, basically showed that mysticism, not only was it not minor, it was the primary form of Jewish theology and Jewish history. So in other words, if you are, I always pick somebody, okay? So, Manisha, I'm going to pick you. So if Manisha is like, look, I love Judaism, I love being Jewish, I like the holidays, I like what I'm doing, I don't think about God. Like I'm not into all this. Like I got to do theology. And if you go around the table, you say, Manisha, tell me all about your relationship with God. You're like, you know what? I'll pass for now. Come back to me, right? If you're one of those, then you didn't have to, Judaism was fine. You could do everything Jewish. You could become a Talmud scholar. You could become a rabbi. No one would ever think twice about you. But if you actually were so then I'll pick Manisha again. So now Manisha number 2. We're going around where you're being raised in a Jewish community in the 1800s or 1700s or 1500s, and you say, Rabbi, we haven't talked about God. Like we've done Jewish law, we've done Bible, we've done Torah. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with God? I'd be like, okay, you're gonna have to come to my Kabbalah group. I'm gonna start teaching you what God really is. I only teach that to people who really want to learn, and then I screen people who ask, so that people who wanted to learn what we really thought about God would be taught mysticism, and they would be screened. And you'll see that in texts that hopefully we can take a look at. Maybe even today we'll get 1 or 2 in. So that it was considered dangerous, because if you start thinking too much about God, you might start questioning the normal, everyday, regular practices of conventional religion, including conventional Judaism. So that it's a dangerous thing to do. If you start thinking God is everywhere, then you start to wonder, then does God really need it? Like, if God is not listening to my prayers, then do I really need to go to Minyan tonight? Right? It's really, really serious. So they were very big on screening. Bottom line is this. We now know that mystical thinking, branches of Kabbalah, were the form of Jewish theology. We don't have lots of other theology books in the Jewish canon. We don't have lots of Aquinas and and the church fathers and origins. If you read the Talmud looking for theology, you're really not going to find any. You're going to find so little. They'll ask you, they'll be like, does God listen to prayers? Of course God listens to prayers. God listens to the prayers of those who open their hearts to God. That's beautiful. I think it's true. It's not theology, right? You'll find lots of that in the Talmud, and then they'll stop. They're not going to say, so how does God listen to prayers if God doesn't have ears? We're moving on. So here we go. So what's the basis of Kabbalah? The basis is, and it goes back all the way to the Mishnaic times. The Mishnah was published in 200 CE. You already see there the famous stories of rabbis using meditative techniques to try to come close to God and the dangers therein. So it has a lot to do, I won't even talk about it now, about basically forms of Neoplatonistic philosophy. The idea that there are hidden forms within reality. And, as Plato might have said, you may never see a perfect triangle, but there wouldn't be any triangles if there weren't such a thing as the perfect triangle. And math is about the perfect triangle. So Neoplatonism took it further, that says the world may just look normal, but hiding beneath the world are these perfect spiritual forms of reality. There is like the sense of what the perfect tree is that makes possible all the trees. And that's God. God is like this metaphysical perfect reality. It's the math. It's the math that's making the whole thing work. The interesting thing is that theology of Kabbalah is steeped in irony. And this is true of mysticism in general. It both goes off in the direction of being very superstitious and very touchy-feely, and it goes off in the direction of being highly abstract and highly mathematical. And so it's a mixture. It's not one or the other. So here we go. The rabbis ask already in the commentaries on the Torah, what is the universe made out of? What existed prior to creation? And they answer, well, the only thing that existed was God. So therefore, God must have made the universe out of God. And are there any hints of this in the Torah? Of course there is. What's the first thing that God made? Is light. But it says that and it's not until the fourth day that God made things that are capable of creating light, like the stars and the solar systems and stuff. And so therefore, the light on day one is God light, and everything is made of God light. And that's a standard interpretation in the normal Talmudic commentaries on the Torah. So they're lifting out something we all read, but let's say we were in yeshiva, we're in the Talmud Academy, and Manisha says to me, wait, we just did that interpretation. Rabbi, tell me more. You know what? We'll do it tomorrow. Let's keep going, right? So like, we don't go down the rabbit hole. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole, and I say, Manisha, okay, I got to screen you. Are you really kosher for studying this stuff with me? Are you committed to Judaism? Are you committed to daily prayer? If you are, we're going to start a lesson then. And then it was master disciple taught Kabbalah. The disciple would then learn, yeah, there's a reason you were intrigued by that. Everything actually is made of God energy. And you know what God is? Like and they'll start in with the metaphors. God is like water. Like the universe, there was nothing but an infinite sea of God energy. And in that infinite sea of God energy, the universe came to be by God making an empty vacuum space within. And we call this God's womb, because the way one produces life is one has to have an empty space within one in order to have something come out that is not the same thing as one. So if there is an empty space within the waters, I mean, they also call it the waters. It's a sea of light energy, sea of God energy. So the God energy starts going back in to this empty vacuum space to start creating our universe. But a problem happened, which is sometimes the energy, and this is the umbilical cord, the energy would flow back into the empty space, and then sometimes the space would just fill up again. And then it would just be all God again, because that's what happens. But there was one time where God got it right, and the womb formed, the umbilical cord started putting back God energy back in, and something like matter and time began to form. Space and time first came into existence. And as the energy flowed in, the energy by its nature has an aspect of infinitude, because it's God energy cannot be contained in matter perfectly. So as matter and energy were mixed together, there was a gigantic explosion, and it's called Shevira. So the Shevira is the shattering. It's the great shattering. The great shattering occurs. Our universe is the great shattering. It's the stars, it's the universes, it's what Genesis is trying to describe. But what you don't realize is that none of the fragments of that matter would exist without the divine energy being trapped in them and at all times keeping them sustained. So it's like there's a little bit of water, of the divine water, trapped in the matter, keeping it alive. Now, and so that what religion is it is about developing a receptive awareness to the divine energies that are animating the world. And if you're like, wait a second, how do I find the divine energy in my piece of tofu? You're like, you know what, Manisha, that's not lesson number one. So I'm sorry, I keep picking on you. So Robin, that's not lesson number one. Okay, let's start easier. What do you think your soul is? All right, your soul is not a thing. I'm not going to cut you open and take out your soul. What your soul is it's a spark of energy. It's a fire. It's a fire that is being fed by God. And in fact, when things were shattered, in a way, God was shattered. Not all of God. There's still our universe could go away and God would still be there. But God, in a way, it's like there's this well of water, this ocean of water, and some of the water is in us. And we are extensions of that. And your soul, and so they keep using elemental language, which would be appropriate for their time. You can think about it as water. And then they say when you die, your soul actually travels back and goes back into the well of souls. It goes back into the water, which is beautiful. So your spark of energy goes back into a well that is pure God. It's your other home, because you're always living in two homes at once. You are living in God right now because that home of your thing is in God, but it's also in you living in the material world. So we would start with that. The tofu also has sparks of God because, and then they go this way, which is that, how do you think the universe developed? Look at Genesis, which is the God energy is in matter. And then it spreads out into vegetation. And then it spreads out into animal life, and then into human life. So your soul has a vegetative element. They call it. A lot of it comes from Aristotle. It has a human element, an animal element, and it has a human element. Why don't we eat milk mixed with meat? Because the animal souls, the cow and the lamb and everything, goat, they have that same kind of water. They have the same divine energy. They have that diffraction of divine energy that makes them love their children and feed them and raise them. So we don't mix milk and meat because that we have an animal. The animal soul is part of our human soul. It's not that the human soul eliminates that. And actually, they also think we actually share things with plants because we have a vegetative soul. The vegetative soul is the part of you. What does a plant do? A plant soaks in nourishment. A plant grows. A plant grows toward the light. A plant. And so like those parts of you, I mean, I was just talking to Lynn this morning about what daily vitamin I need to start switching to. How do we nourish ourselves? How do we grow toward the light? I mean, mental illness and struggles. I mean, part of that's the vegetative part of our soul, not the human part of our soul. How do we grow healthy? How do we not get blocked so that we're not getting the sunlight? So they just go, they go off and off on this. And so I realized 227, so I'll keep going. So everything's made of divine light. You want to be receptive to seeing the light. And what does it mean that God is the king, right? In a personal God world, or personal God theology, God's the king. You know what? I'm going to meet Lynn and get married and have 2 beautiful children. It's up to the king. The king's making the matches. What control? Destiny. God's running the kingdom like a human king. God decides, you know what? It's going to be a beautiful summer. It's not going to be a beautiful summer. That's not Kabbalah. So you don't have a human-like figure on a throne making human-like decisions in Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, the idea is when you say God is Melech, God is king, what you mean is that the universe operates according to laws. So when I translate the word Melech, I don't say sovereign. Sovereign is the new gender-neutral term that came out like 50 years ago, and I can't stand it. I just hate it when people are trying to pick a gender-neutral term and they pick a word that is so foreign that none of us care about it. So like now it's just like more like, it's just like we can all equally not relate to the word sovereign, so we're good. I mean, isn't that true, Robin? I mean, come on. So like, so what I say is lawmaker. This universe operates according to laws, and the king is, and that goes with Jewish theology. God made the laws. God's the lawgiver, right? When God says like it is not good for this, or it's not, we're trying to figure out how the world works. And the way God loves us is because what it means that we have knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge of, and the prayers are about this. A lot of the prayers are about this. Is that it's I quoted Ross Douthat's New York Times essay from last week in my sermon, and I read a little piece he said. One of the things he said should attract people to go to church or synagogue. He's a Catholic. Like the absolute awe that on some level each of us is a God in miniature because we have the capacity to understand that the universe operates according to laws. I agree 100%. I sometimes hate Ross Douthat, and I sometimes love him, and I love that. And so that in Kabbalah, you're trying to use this ability to understand how the universe is working in hidden and visible ways. And it's very Jewish because it's like God is the lawmaker. What are the laws? How's this universe operating? The more you understand about how so it gets very abstract and scientific and even mathematical. So I'm gonna jump to another piece of it, which is this. Wait a second, Nadav. So tell us a little bit more about this God. Okay, God has a proper name, like Robin is Robin and Harvey's Harvey and Max and I'm Nadav. God has a proper name, and it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. And God also has lots of names, right? That we see through the Torah and in other places, and we've attributed to God. And perhaps one of the most important ones is Ein Sof. So God, from God's own perspective, God's truest name, without concern about us, like how we understand God, is infinity. So Ein Sof means infinity. It's often translated like the endless with capital T and capital E, or the infinite one, capital T, capital I, capital O. I think all of those are mistakes. It's infinity. It's the way it operates in the text. It's very important to feel God in and of God's self is infinity. The finitude came into being out of infinity. And even what time is and space is was only possible in the context of there being the infinite. And one of the ways they understand this, which I adore, is that, so if infinity is God's sort of truest essence, Can you tell me more, Kabbalah? Is there one step? I can't understand infinity. I can't think about infinity. We can't conceive of infinity. We can pretend, and it's not real. It's not trillions and trillions, and then just put it to the trillionth power. My brain does not relate to it. I don't know how to think about a time that would be eternal. Well, actually, it wouldn't be time, because infinity can be beyond time. So that they say the next word, the next form of infinity emanating itself is becoming. Okay, so what does that mean? What it means is this. The only, and I don't know how to do this well, so I'll just do it as I always, we'll see. In this moment of time, I'm Nadav at T1. And then in this moment of time, I'm Nadav at T2. And in this moment of time, I'm in Nadav at T3 on a timeline. And I should think about that. The Kabbalistic texts don't use this example, but if the medieval they were early modern. If the early modern rabbis of Tzfat were around today, they would agree with me on this one. I would get an A+ on my take-home test. They see it like a movie film, old-fashioned movie film. Each frame is reality frozen in time, and there's another frame, and there's another frame, and there's another frame. So now back to them. That was my example. They say the only way that we can exist in time is that at every infinitely small, infinitesimal moment, we are passing from we're going through what we just were into what we are becoming, and then we're it. And then we're passing through the black strip between the frames. So they say that at every moment, the only way anything could exist is if it's actually being sustained by infinity, because time is not possible without you constantly being in the process of no longer being what you just were, and you're becoming what you are now, which is now no longer what you just were, and you're becoming something else. So that time itself was created by infinity, lives inside infinity, is a form of finitude and infinity being mixed together. So if you're like, it doesn't make sense that there's infinity, infinitude, and we can't even think infinity, all of that's true. The great intersection is time. Time is the intersection of infinity and finitude. And it even affects the physical world. So in one of their most famous texts, they say, people don't realize, they look at a stone and they say there's no God in the stone. And they don't realize that if it weren't for God, infinity, the stone would absolutely just disappear. It would dissolve. That everything is sustained within time by God's aspect of becoming. It's change. And so that, and I've taught in my Judaism and Buddhism course, this really does have pretty significant intersections with early Buddhism. I mean, what does it mean to embrace the idea that everything is impermanent, and that not only that I study it, but it doesn't matter what my bona fides are. I'm telling you, it's almost identical. I mean, there's a lot of people who say, oh, you can't do comparative religions like that. Yes, you can. I mean, this is what it's saying. It's saying that when I look at my wife, and the Buddha does the same thing in the early teachings, and I see Lynn, I am not seeing her in her aspect of the fact that she is changing all the time. We are not things, we are processes. We are not, and yes, do I carry trauma? Do I carry things that are unprocessed from my past? Absolutely, because that gets trapped in your energy. Your energy is your soul, and your energy contains things that get trapped from the past. But your energy is also changing all the time. So that we do see reality not through God eyes, but through, unfortunately, false eyes. Because we tend to think the world is a collection of things and things persist. But through God's eyes, things are changing all of the time. People are in process, they're evolving, they're growing. And this again goes back to what Genesis kind of taught us, which is that, in a way, that's your vegetative element too. Everything's participating in that. Your inorganic parts of you are also a part of that. They're changing form all the time. And so growth, leaving the Garden of Eden, evolving, is a godlike feature of what we're involved in. So those are some of the biggest principles. And I wanted to show you a little bit of some text. So if I share my screen, so we'll start. Is it okay if I read a little bit and so you get to see? So the greatest Kabbalist of the 16th century was really my hero. He was acknowledged. His name was Moshe Cordovero. He lived in Cordova, although the Inquisition kicked him out, and like most of the great Kabbalistic rabbis who ended up in Israel, a lot of his family was killed and relatives were killed in the Inquisition. So he started in Spain, ended up in Israel, in Sfat, in that town. And by the age of 25, he was the most famous rabbi in Europe. He was a master of the Talmud Bible, and he was the leading Kabbalist as well. He said, an impoverished person thinks that God is an old man with white hair, sitting on a wondrous throne of fire that glitters with countless sparks. As the Bible states, the Ancient of Days sits, the hair on his head like clean fleece, his throne flames of fire. So why do people think that God's on a throne? Because the Bible says so. Imagining this and similar fantasies, the fool corporealizes God. He falls into one of the traps that destroys faith. His Yirat Hashem, which means his awe of God, the relationship we need to have with God is one that is of awe, is limited by his imagination. But if you are enlightened, you know God's oneness. You know that the divine is devoid of bodily categories. These can never be applied to God. And then you wonder, astonished, wait a second, if God's not like that, who am I? I am a mustard seed, a tiny, 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 tiny seed in the middle of the sphere of the moon, which itself is a mustard seed within the next sphere. So it is with that sphere and all it contains in relation to the next sphere. So it is with all the spheres, one inside the other, and all of them are a mustard seed within the further expanses. And all of these are a mustard seed within further expanses. If you do this exercise, your awe, meaning your relationship to God, is invigorated, and the love in your soul expands. So this goes back to like my joking earlier about whether Manisha was my disciple. So what I would do if Manisha was my disciple, and I would say, okay, you really think, I don't think this stuff is going to scare you off from being a Jew. I don't think it's going to destroy your faith. So one thing I would say is, why don't you go pray for 6 months? And every time you see the word God, replace it by infinity. Okay? And if you come back and you say, I am no longer want to be a Jew, none of this speaks to me, then I know I did the wrong thing. But if you can do that, you will deepen your level of connection to God. So practice using the name infinity. And then, or here, this is an activity, which is if you feel that well, it doesn't matter if you feel. How do you relate to infinity? You do this exercise. Imagine everything is a circle. So what's surrounding that? How do we relate to infinity? Through mental exercises like this, through realizing how small we are. One of, as Harvey and Carol know, like my area in scholarship ended up being in the relationship of religion and science. And I like to teach it, and there's a lot of resistance to it. When I start to teach, like, I want to look at superstring theory, or I want to look at this, people are like, this has nothing to do with the Torah. This has nothing to do with Judaism. Like, Nadav, you're just off on one of the, I'm like, well, no. I mean, like, they were basically talking about, these days you can look at this stuff on YouTube. Back then you had to do it all in your head, like these like images of the universe, like expanding. What does it mean to relate to the greatness of the universe? What does it mean to relate to time? These things go pretty far back. They used to do, I'm sorry. So here's another piece from, so I say many of the Kabbalists used a combination of, I'm not saying you have to use prayer as meditation, but prayer became oriented around exercises. And they would use mantric meditation. The person would relax and free their mind of the usual clutter. They would use visualization meditation to manipulate Hebrew letters, to imagine Hebrew letters and then start manipulating them into patterns. The prayers were thus not simply a matter of thanking God for things or singing God's praises or asking for things, but rather it was a holy act where the sounds and shapes of the letters were as important as their meanings. Manipulating the sounds and shapes can help us connect with a higher reality. So Moshe Cordovero, from one of his students, was quoted, "Out of his love for man, God has fixed these letters in the mouth of man in order to enable him to cleave." That's a technical term for connecting to his creator by the very pronunciation of the sounds here below. When he studies Torah or praise, he shakes and stirs up the roots above. The meaning of the verb fixed is similar to sticking the end of a shalshelet, a chain, in one place and the other end in another place, the distance between the places notwithstanding. When a man shakes the end of the chain, which is in his hand, he shakes the whole chain. So I'm going to just stop for a second before going on. So if everything has God energy keeping it going in time, both through the laws of the universe, which are all about, like, the laws mean, like, how do we understand the patterns of change through time? Another way of trying to understand what science is and predict it and understand what's happening in the moment. So that one way to think about it is that it's not that God is up there and I'm here and I'm trying to connect with God, but the umbilical cords that connect us to the God energy, to infinity, it's everywhere. It's in every electron. It's as every single point is connected to it. So therefore, and this is where I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'll say what it says. In a way, you have to think of it like there are two worlds. There's the world we see and the God world everything is connected to. And everything we do in this world is like a chain or an umbilical cord. Everything we do here affects this shadow world, affects this God world. And if there was something happening within the God world, it then comes back and it affects me. And so that every action is significant. If God is up there and I'm down here, then, like, I don't know, maybe God didn't notice that I yelled at my kids, right? Maybe I get away with that one. But not if you're a Kabbalist, because when I yelled at my kids, I did send energy, negative energy, through the chain, and I polluted reality. Now, if you're following Leviticus, as we are with each week, we're in Leviticus, we're in the middle. One of the things you'll see in Leviticus just now, and you'll see it continue through the Torah, is a very important idea of polluting the land. That sin, or especially things like unsolved murders, pollute pollute the pond we swim in. That idea of pollution is important in Kabbalah because it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if you can't see me yell at my kids. I have polluted the pond that invisibly connects us all. And so that every action is significant. What you do, it's invisibly connected with every other thing. Another, the way the rabbis, the Kabbalistic rabbis imagine it, is a lot like, they use the water metaphors primarily, but they also use spark metaphors and fire metaphors. It's like we're all on an invisible energy grid. And my soul, my node on the grid is connected to your nodes on the grid. Now, right now, it's obvious because I'm talking and you're listening. But even when we shut it off, we're all interconnected. So what happens, we're all part of one body. What happens to the hand is affecting the other hand. In the sermon I did yesterday, one of the things I tried to say, I mean, if I was trying to bring something original, I was trying to point out that the links in the holiness code are a recognition that you do not see covenant, right? If I'm just like, I want to have a hamburger and I'm going to go buy a piece of meat, what I don't realize is that we domesticated the cow. They'll die if we don't feed them and help them. and we live off of their products, like their milk. That's a covenantal relationship. Covenantal relationships are ones that go through time. They go beyond time, right? I'm looking at a beautiful couple sitting in front of us, right? And so one of the reasons that the sexual morality laws are there is because it may just see that two people fell in love, and that's a beautiful thing. But the truth is, they're tying not only their genetic codes, they're tying their families that go back in time. And should they get married and should they have children, those families are linked forever, right? So, like, God sees that. God sees the covenantal meaning across time, these are relationships that are across relations of mutual benefit and mutual interaction, interconnectedness that exist across time. So domesticating animals, we have a covenantal relationship with them. I don't see that. I just want a hamburger, right? Two people just ask each other out on a date. They don't see the implications for entire family trees mixing together and changing the world. Like that's the fabric of the universe. And so similarly, the Kabbalists go further, which is we're really, if you're going to see things through a God eyes, it goes beyond family, how you eat your animals, Yom Kippur. It's every action. Everything you do either pollutes or cleanses. It either harmonizes or disharmonizes. And so I've used words like infinity, becoming, which is the translation of God's proper name. Yud, He, Vav, He is a kind of gerundive grammatical form for the verb to be. So God's proper name actually is a combination of it was, it is, and it will be. And regardless of the fact that we don't pronounce it, it basically does mean becoming. It is the intersection of past, present, and future. And that's why holiness imprints on reality is the understanding of the interconnectedness that we have in the present moment and to the past and to the future. It's a God consciousness. And so everything is being affected all of the time. So I did that word, I did the becoming word, and the next major word for what God is, because they have these different words, is Tiferet. And Tiferet, I've talked about sometimes at services. Tiferet is, my wife asked me to translate it last week because it came up in a prayer. It's in a lot of the prayers, the word Tiferet. It's usually translated as splendor. I don't even know what splendor is. I mean, I guess I should. Tiferet is, it's a kind of beauty that comes about when things are in perfect harmony. So, it's, when the tree roots are giving back to the bacteria that live in there, that in the soil, they're in symbiotic relationship. When the tree is getting what it needs from the bacteria in the soil, and the soil is getting what it needs from the tree, and they're in balance, that's Tiferet. It's the beauty of harmonious covenantal relationships. And so that when it comes to your actions in this world, I mean, if Ari said to me, well, okay, infinity, how do I have my actions don't really affect infinity? Yeah, my actions don't really affect becoming. They're an aspect of becoming. Yes. So what's action do? Action affects Tiferet. It affects whether you are bringing things into harmonious balance or whether you're throwing them out of balance. And so everything that you do, every word that you utter, every gesture you make, every decision you make with your time, every behavior of yours shakes the chains, passes things through, it sounds silly, but you're either putting out good vibes or you're putting out bad vibes. What are the good vibes? What are the bad vibes? They are that which brings the universe, brings balance or lack of balance. So I'm going to show you a chart. And the chart is back to Kabbalah. Okay. There's a great story here that I have as a quote. It is about someone who sought to study Kabbalah. And the first thing that their mentor told them to do was to start doing forms of meditation And they thought it was ridiculous until one day they achieved a kind of state of consciousness they'd never experienced before. And they were like, wow, people don't realize this is possible. I'm going to go forward here. So this is the chart. So you could say, sorry, I can make it a little smaller. There we go. Many of you, you may have already seen this, of course. Tell me more about the energy. Is there anything more you can say about it? Yes, the Kabbalists have a lot to say about it. They've determined that you can think of something like an energy signature of divine energy. If you had a pure form of divine energy, what would it look like? They said it would look like a kind of crystalline structure that is in 10 parts. And it's balanced. And if you look at the belly button, what do you see? Tiferet. What do you see up at the top? So let's look at the, I don't know if you can see my little arrow, but if you look at the very tippy top circle, it says Keter. And if you look over here, it says nothingness. Nothingness is another word for becomingness. It's very Buddhist, but it's the same idea that when you see that everything is changing all the time, you see everything is a process, not a thing, then you realize that it's constantly becoming nothing and then another thing, and then no longer a thing and then another thing. So what a process is that it's the black parts of the movie frame of when you have a piece of movie film. So nothingness is flowing into everything so that time can exist. The next middle piece is Tiferet, which is that when you're bringing holiness to the world, you are bringing it into a state of beautiful balance. And then at the bottom, Yesod and Shekhinah are two technical terms. One could be viewed as male energy, and one it could be viewed as female energy. And that itself is a gross oversimplification that, especially in today's time, we need to think more carefully about. But what I would say is that at the very least, they're understanding that when it says that we are created in the image of God, and it specifically says in Genesis chapter 1, it seems to indicate by the verse that God is both male and female. That means that the divine energy, when male and female energy are in complete balance, that we are fully like God. So that when we are able to channel those energies so that they're in balance, and they're in a vertical balance rather than a horizontal balance. Each of the lines in between are like connecting the nodes, or they're pipes that are connecting all of. It's like this is a silly straw, and all of this is water, and it can be flowing in all directions, or it's an energy grid. And so I'm going to give you an example, because I know the time is short, of I did it on the video from last year. Give me one example of what this means. The ones that you will most often be coming into contact with, I suspect, the ones that most of us are coming into contact with in terms of being able to read a situation and and put out good energy. What is our impact on the universe, on God? Because this is God. Like, we are part of God, and we can, we're on the God grid. Like, we have free will to shake the God grid in both directions. It's like shaking the chain at us, and we're riding up and down on it, and then we can grab our hands and shake it right back, and other people are part of this interconnected God chain. So one of the main ways is through chesed and gevurah. Grace, love, forgiveness, judgment, strength, and rigor. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can see y'all. This is the one that we're faced with at almost every moment of our life. Can I see in the reality of especially the people before me, or animals or whatever, but figure people, we'll limit it to that for the moment. Can I see, they would call it the color of their energy, because each of these are attributed to colors. And the goal of Kabbalah, and it really is true, I think this is the goal of religion and holiness. You're trying to learn to look at the world through a different set of glasses. You're trying to break off the way we're ordinarily seeing it. You're trying to see yourself and the world as God sees you. And so what that means is that to start seeing that do you show someone a forgiving parental love, or do you show someone in the moment a form of respecting them enough to show them structure and accountability? And the wisdom to know which one that person needs in that moment either will have the effect of damaging the universe or bringing it into balance. And so on one day, I shouldn't use you guys as an example, I should use something more abstract, right? Let's say someone comes to me and they say, Rabbi, I've missed almost all of the Intro to Judaism sessions, but I'm really sincere, right? There's no algorithm that's going to tell me whether I should say you have to take the course again, or you can just watch the videos and catch up. And if you think life will give you those algorithms, you are going to live a life of bad faith. You're going to live a misguided life. So what it is, can I read your energy well enough to know that in this moment, you need the forgiving love of saying, I understand. It's not the same thing as compassion. Just be careful. It's a little bit different. I can be compassionate and still punish, right? It's like, is what will bring the universe into balance right now, saying it's okay that you missed them. And I trust you can make them up and we're still good. Or is it to say, we signed a contract or we have an agreement and you need to do this again for you. If you don't do it again, you're not going to, deep down, you're not going to feel good about yourself. What it means to be try to be holy in this world, there's no way around it. It means trying to be the biggest person in the room at all times. It doesn't matter if you're with your siblings or your best friends or your coworkers, or you're a boss and they're working for you, or you're their employee and they're your boss. Spiritual grandeur, spiritual investment is to find a way not to be reactive in each moment of your life and to aspire to try to be, in a way, everyone's Abba and Ima, to try to be everyone's parent, to try to be the biggest person in the room. But that doesn't mean you just say, you're fine, it's all good. Because sometimes other people need forgiveness and sometimes they need the respect of having structure and accountability. And so the rabbis say, it's so easy to understand. Your child comes to you, you told them, I don't know, trying to think of real examples on it. Don't play on your cell phone with the babysitter. You know that's against the rules. And when I get home from the date, with your mom or your dad or whatever, whatever, but they ate the cookies that you made to bring to grandmom tomorrow. Okay. And they told the babysitter it was okay. How do you know whether in this moment, this is the moment to say, you get a pass, or this is the moment to say, we're not going to grandma's tomorrow. I know you want to, but you needed to know. And the rabbis say, if you forgive your kids all the time, they'll be so spoiled, they'll be dependent and spoiled, they'll find the world a scary and anxious place, they won't be resilient or independent. But if you're always focusing on the structure, and you're always saying, you don't get a free pass on anything, they'll be damaged. They'll be damaged in an equal and opposite way. And you can't make a formula to say, it's okay, I'll keep a diary. Last time I forgave you, this time you're punished. It doesn't work that way. This is what religion is. This is what connection to God is. Can you evolve yourself to know what the energies are around you and know how to deal with them? That's what you're trying to do. That's your goal. That's your relationship with God. So Tiferet becomes the goal of action. How do I bring things into harmony? And it is basically, the best definition of Tiferet really is ecological balance, because the basis of covenant is ecological symbiosis. And so it is scientific. We're all sharing the same pond. And I may look like I'm at a great distance from that part of the pond that's all the way over there. You're not. You know why? You go the wrong way with your kid that time, you're changing them so that in the future they behave differently. I mean, the way all of these actions go, and by the way, if you're an anxious person, I apologize if I just made you anxious, because one of the annoying things about mysticism is that everything you do matters. It's really sucks, right? Like and that's one of the reasons that I need Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I've tried to say it from the Bima before, but I'm often not sure if I'm making any sense. I need a day each year to be like, I fucked up so much this past year, I can't even imagine it. And then people say to me, well, I don't say exactly in those words. And then people say to me, oh, I mean, I used to get this all the time when I'd say this on Rosh Hashanah. People would be like, Rabbi, you're such a nice guy. You didn't mess up. I don't know why you're so hard on yourself. Because I aspire to this. Like, don't you realize we are screwing up all the time? Like just with the waiter and the waitress, with the person at the checkout counter, there was someone right there who just needed me to say hello. And I was too wrapped up in my own head and I didn't say hello. Or I said hello and I made a big deal of it and they needed to be left alone. Like, this is what sin is in Judaism. Sin is not like, I don't know, whatever. I put a stumbling block in front of a blind person and it's pretty bad. No, I mean, sin is like, we are so powerful. Right? We're so powerful in the ecosystem of the world and of our lives and of our society and we're messing up all the time. So we need to be like, God knows you're messing up all the time, but you know what? Are you doing a little bit more good than bad? And are you aspiring to walk more in God's ways? So Rosh Hashanah is, you basically say, I mean, I'm the guy who teaches about good language and I've used language badly, and it's like, it's okay. It's okay. But now let it go and start again. Start again. How can you walk with God this year? How can you improve your ability to be the biggest person in the room in the situations you're in? But don't be patronizing. You think you're the biggest person in the room, but you're a bit of an asshole, because you're patronizing. Like it's not like you do this, you're good. Like, it's challenging because there's no algorithm for how to live perfectly. The mitzvot are there. The ways of living are there, but the mitzvot, how you apply them in every 1 minute. I mean, they are not they don't satisfy the needs of every moment. They are like a spiritual technology to help you navigate this terrain of the ecosystem, but they're not going to tell you whether to take a left turn here or go straight. If you want that, go to a cult, and they'll tell you that, and you won't be doing anybody any good. So that brings us to 305, and that's sort of like, there's obviously so much more. You can study this whole thing your whole life, but that's basically the other way to go with the religious life. There are positives and negatives to it in so many ways. Studying Kabbalah itself can be very, very frustrating because there are a lot of Kabbalistic thinkers who want to map out your metaphysical reality. And I've always been a little bit resistant to that because, like, when I'm trying to figure out how to behave, I don't necessarily want someone to show me some complicated, mandala. And like, mandalas are common in Kabbalah. Like, I mean, like, well, Nadav, if only you understood the spark structure. I mean, they have things that look like acupuncture of charts. I mean, there's sort of an endless amount of, let me show you the map to the spiritual reality stuff. And I mean, so for example, yes, I mean, it can get very superstitious. Like, they can really say, well, you're affecting the invisible reality. So that's why you say the bracha. The bracha will change the spiritual reality. Metaphysics can get very mechanical. And so it's not as simple as, Nadav, I want to hear more about this. Like, I can study it. You can get a guru. And I'm very skeptical of gurus. So that, it doesn't solve everything. But what it can do is, to me, having a metaphysical, Kabbalistic orientation to God can be just very empowering. It can make having a relationship with God a continual and every moment exercise. And I don't want to live without that. I want my relationship to God to be at every moment, right? I don't want to wait for it to when I'm praying. I don't want to wait for it to when I do a mitzvah. That's why, like, when I offended a teacher 2 years ago when I let my temper out. I think I caused damage in the universe. I did. Where I was like, I just have a problem with the way you're teaching Judaism, because you're teaching the commandments arithmetically. And they said, what do you, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean I'm teaching them arithmetically? And I said, because you seem to be saying like, the more mitzvahs that you do, the better you are. Like you're getting point for each mitzvah, and they're like, yeah, but don't you? And I'm like, no, it's not like I just do more mitzvahs and then I'm holy. Like it's about every moment. Like it's about the mitzvahs being integrated into a kind of life that's complete. That's complete. You can be strong, because if you're only weak, you spoil everybody and you make them weak. You can be strong when you need to be strong. You can be tender and weak when you need to be tender. I remember I was at a pastoral counseling class in rabbinical school, and I'd already been pastoral counseling for a while. And they kept saying, you just have to listen, you have to listen, you have to listen. And I raised my hand. I said, that's so true, except when you need to speak. And they're like, no. When you need to speak, you just shut up and listen some more. And I'm like, has anyone ever done any pastoral counseling? I mean, it's great. Let's say, Harvey comes to me, it may be a perfect thing for me to listen for an hour. But at the end, if Harvey says, so Nadav, what do you think? I can't be like, Harvey, let me listen some more. In other words, like you can't just be like, I get a point, I listened. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's like, can you know what people need? Can you channel it? Can you make yourself a holy vessel for doing so? So that'll, oh, good. I just want to confirm, let's do some logistics. Do we have class next week as well on the 22nd? Good. So that I'm going to continue this class into June, because we have to postpone for those who are going to mikvah, we got to postpone it anyway. And because we've missed a bit here and there, and I've gotten behind, I'm just going to keep going every other Sunday through June, so that we have some extra time to get to everything. And let me look at what next week is and whether we're having class next week. Because right now it's on, I basically go by the Intro to Judaism page on the website. And if I see that there's a mistake there, I update it. So right now it says there's one on May 2nd, which would be next week. So thank you for noticing. See, structure is important. When I get structure wrong, bad things happen. I waste people's time. And so I'm looking, today's the 25th. So if we do May 2nd, yeah, because I didn't want to do Mother's Day. Yes, we do. I had to change it because I didn't want to have to talk to me on Mother's Day. It didn't seem right. So May 2nd, after that, it'll be May 16th, which is Erev Shavuot. And then we'll move on from there. I have to add more dates so that we know what we're doing. Does that make sense? And I'll try to update the Intro to Judaism page for that. Any parting shots or things? I mean, I know I talked a lot. There's some just great text to share. I couldn't resist. There's always more to do. So anyway, it's late, 3:10. You've sat here for 2 hours plus. And thanks to everyone who came on a beautiful day. I'll see you next Sunday, okay?
Thank you.
Thank
See you next
you.
Sunday.
Thank you. See you guys.
Pleasure.